Hi, I'm Dom and welcome back to the Clown's Pocket. This is the Victorinox Explorer, and if you know your 91mm Victorinox knives, you'll know which layer it is that separates this one from the rest of the 4-layer pack. The thing is though, I also think that very same layer might be ready for a rethink. So in this video I'm going to do 3 things. First, I'd like to try and date this particular Explorer because it belongs to a friend of mine and it's got some very interesting older features. Second, I want to see if it still earns its place as one of the best urban carry Swiss Army knives that Victorinox make. And finally, I'll show you the one change I would love Victorinox to make if they were ever going to redesign this for today. All right, so let's get into it. Before we start examining the tools themselves, let's see if we can work out roughly when this particular Explorer was made. Now, Victorinox are pretty good at leaving little clues behind over the years, and when you start putting them all together, you can usually narrow things down pretty well. Now, this one has the older grey 8x glass magnifier rather than the later clear version. That tells us we're looking at something from before around 2004 when Victorinox changed to the clear magnifier. And on the main blade, we've got the 4-line tang stamp. Let's just see if I can bring that up there, which says Victorinox with a larger V, Switzerland stainless rostfrei. And on the reverse, we have the Swiss cross, the crossbow, and Officier Suisse. And more importantly, the Swiss cross doesn't actually touch either the crossbow or the word officier. Now, that particular tang stamp was used from roughly 1992 until 2005. So straight away, we know this knife is post 1992. The scissors are the later riveted type rather than the older screw construction, and Victorinox are generally understood to have made that change around 1991. So that fits. Likewise, the presence of the multi-purpose hook points to the early 1990s onwards. So again, nothing here contradicts what we've seen so far. Now, the corkscrew. This is an interesting one. It still does have the groove around it, although it's very slight and becomes so worn that you can almost feel it better than you can see it. So you may not be able to see it very well on the video, but I can assure you, you can feel it there with your thumbnail. And the later groove corkscrews are already becoming shallower than the earlier ones, but knowing whose it is, I also suspect this one's opened quite a heroic quantity of wine over the years. Either way, the presence of that groove, microscopic though it is, suggests we're looking at a knife from 1994 or prior. Now, there's also no pinhole underneath the corkscrew, and the lack of a pin on standard, i.e. not plus Celidor scales, points to pre-2005, which again fits the picture. So putting all of those clues together, I'd say that this Explorer was likely made somewhere between 1992 and 1994. The 2 most useful pieces of evidence are the ones that put the brackets around the dates. The tang stamps tell us that it's post 1992, while the grooved corkscrew points to pre-1994. Everything else fits very comfortably within that same window. Of course, if there are any Victorinox historians watching that think I might have missed something, I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Dating these older Swiss Army knives is always a bit of detective work. Let's get the numbers out of the way quickly. I'll be weighing and measuring this one anyway, but I'll also put the figures up on the screen as well. So just leaving my handyman here for reference, we are looking at 91mm long, or 3.6 inches, about 26mm or just over an inch wide, and about 22mm thick. That's roughly 0.9 of an inch. In terms of weight, it comes in at 100 grams or about 3.5 ounces. And as Swiss Army knives go, I think this is a really useful size. It's big enough to be capable without being too bulky in the pocket. Now this is where I think the Explorer starts to make a lot of sense. Compared with something like my beloved Handyman, both are 91mm, but the Explorer is noticeably slimmer, noticeably lighter, and for me at least, about as big as I would comfortably carry inside a jeans pocket. The Handyman is brilliant, but once it gets to that size, I'm generally carrying it in a pouch or keeping it handy on a shelf around the house. For what it's worth, my own daily carry is actually the SOG Power Pint. I simply prefer having a decent set of pliers on me. But if I am carrying a 91mm Swiss Army knife, this is about the size that I would naturally gravitate towards. So for carrying the Explorer, I would use one of these dangle clips alongside some kind of quick release mechanism. It lets the knife sit upright inside the pocket, and it keeps it easy to grab and stops it sliding down into the bottom of your jeans. One other thing worth mentioning before we start opening tools, for me, this is very much an urban Swiss Army knife. Around the house, around town, tightening the odd screw here and there, day-to-day jobs. That is where the Explorer really shines. I know if I'm going camping or heading into the woods, I'd much rather have something with a saw. And that's one of the reasons I think the Explorer occupies such a nice place in Victorinox's 91mm range. Among the Victorinox 91mm knives you can easily buy brand new today, I think the Explorer is the sweet spot if you want that superb inline Phillips layer without stepping up to one of the larger models. Now then, let's start opening some tools. Let's start with the blades. The main blade is a drop point slip joint, i.e. not locking, that measures just under 3 inches, making it legal to carry in the UK, provided you're using it responsibly. And for general everyday jobs, it's exactly what you'd expect from Victorinox. Cutting cord, sharpening sticks into tent pegs, slicing up an apple. It's a really useful all-round blade. Alongside it, you've got the smaller blade. Whether you're trimming something accurately or scraping or making a delicate cut, I generally reach for the small blade first and save the larger blade for the heavier work. This 2-blade config has been around for donkey's years, and although for more nautical or tradesman type knives a serrated blade would sometimes come in handy, I think for the Explorer this setup makes sense. Next up are the famous 91mm Victorinox scissors, so let's put them to work. One thing I've always liked about these scissors isn't just their cutting ability, it's how precise they feel. They're happy cutting thicker materials, but they're equally comfortable making tiny, accurate cuts. And that's something that Victorinox have been getting right for decades. Now we come to the opener layer. As you'd expect, you've got your cap lifter, but it's also a very capable flathead screwdriver. And because it has this 90-degree half stop, you can use it like this to get a surprising amount of torque onto a stubborn screw. It's also perfectly happy acting as a light duty pry tool, and for gentle prying jobs, it works really well. One little trick I mentioned in my Handyman video, and it's equally useful here, is adding one of these 1/4-inch socket adapters. That instantly turns the cap lifter into an inline 1/4-inch hex bit driver. And if you really want to get carried away, you can even add a 1/4-inch to 4mm adapter, which opens up a huge range of precision bits as well. Now, I've covered that in the linked video, but I'll put it in the pinned comment and description as well, so stay with me and have a look later. The wire stripper notch has some use, although I still wish Victorinox would let it cut wire as well. On a knife this size, the cutting edge is simply too far away to use the little rotate around the wire trick comfortably. It's a small criticism, but one that screams out easy mod opportunity. Moving across, we've got the Victorinox push style can opener. Now, many people swear by these, and right on the end, there's another screwdriver. So this is a small flathead, but also a 2-dimensional Phillips, and it works really well on PH1 screws, there, as you can see. And it'll handle quite a few PH2 screws as well. It's quite thin, so obviously not intended for heavy duty work, but for smaller screws, it's pretty capable. Now, in just a moment, we're going to get to what I think is the defining layer on the Explorer, and the reason so many people choose this particular model. But before we do that, there's a couple of back tools worth having a look at. Let's start with a corkscrew. Yep, it's very good at opening bottles of wine. There's no surprises there. It's also good for storing these little micro drivers you can buy from Victorinox as extras. I've got a micro flathead, a micro Phillips, and a micro Torx. They're tiny, but surprisingly useful for things like glasses, electronics, and other small screws. I also keep a little bundle of fire lighting material in the corkscrew of my handyman, so there are quite a few ways of making use of what would otherwise just be a corkscrew. Next up, the awl. If you're putting a screw into wood or even plaster and brick, it's brilliant for making a pilot hole. It helps guide the screw and just makes the whole job easier. I also use it a lot for opening parcels. If you choke up right on the awl, only leaving a few millimeters exposed, you can slice through packaging tape without risking whatever's inside the box and keep your knife blades free of gunk. And finally, the multi-purpose hook. Originally, this was intended for carrying string-wrapped parcels, which have been slowly dying out since 3M brought out Scotch tape in the 1930s. And personally, I have yet to receive a string-wrapped parcel from Amazon. These days, it's much more useful as a general purpose hook for tightening bootlaces, ranger bands, that kind of thing, or even turning your knife into a makeshift phone stand. And then there's one of my favourite little Victorinox hacks. I saw this on Felix Imler's channel. So by wrapping a bit of electrician's tape around the end of a T-shank jigsaw blade, you can wedge it into the groove that the hook lives in. So like this. And then when you close the hook, it locks everything together surprisingly securely. That lets you add a wood saw or a file without carrying a bigger knife. And it's a wonderfully simple idea, so thanks for that one, Felix. Right then, we've worked our way around the knife. Now let's get to the layer that really defines the Explorer, and in my opinion is also the best reason to buy one. Let's start with what I think is one of Victorinox's best screwdriver designs. Victorinox officially lists this as a Phillips 1/2 driver, but I honestly think that undersells it a little. The geometry is excellent. It's got a relatively long taper, quite broad wings, and because of that, it engages surprisingly well with a wide range of Phillips screws. It's long enough to get into recessed screw heads that many stubby multi-tool drivers simply can't reach. And because it also has a 90-degree stop, you can put a surprising amount of torque through it when you need to. To give you an idea of how capable this driver is, I've brought in my SOG power pint and 3 dedicated Phillips hex bits. Here's a dedicated PH1 bit. Now the Explorer. No problem. Here's a dedicated PH2. Working on 2 PH2 screws, one slightly bigger than the other. And again, the Explorer handles both quite comfortably. And now a PH3. And now the Explorer. Look how well it engages on that. Now, I wouldn't use the Explorer for heavy-duty PH3 work, but I was really surprised at how well it engaged. For an integrated screwdriver, it is seriously impressive. Honestly, I think this is one of the best inline Phillips drivers I have ever seen on any multi-tool. And among the current 91mm range, the Explorer is about as compact as you can easily buy first hand, while still getting this layer. Now let's talk about the other half of the layer, the magnifying glass. Now this one has the older grey 8x glass magnifier. Later Explorers moved over to a clear lens with a different optical design. And one area where this older glass lens arguably has the advantage is firelighting. If you're ever really stuck, an 8 times glass magnifier concentrates sunlight extremely well. Hopefully not something you'll ever need, but it's worth knowing. The thing is, for my day-to-day life, I just don't think I would use this kind of magnifying glass much anymore. Not because it isn't any good, but because technology has changed. A perfect example is reading the Wi-Fi password on the back of your router. Years ago, a magnifying glass would have made perfect sense. These days, I just point my phone at it, take a photo, and then use 2 fingers to zoom in. It's quick, it's easy, and I've got a much better image to work with. I also carry one of these credit card Fresnel magnifiers alongside my phone. They're inexpensive, although magnification is usually limited to 4 times. They've got a much larger viewing area than the Explorer's lens, and some versions even include a small high-power spot magnifier in one corner. So for reading labels, medicine bottles, or tiny serial numbers, I generally find this more practical. So I'm not saying the magnifying glass is useless, far from it. I'm simply not convinced it's the best use of this layer anymore. Something else that's never really convinced me is the name of this tool. Explorer conjures up images of deserts, jungles, and for me doesn't really fit with such an urban tool. Anyway, that brings me to the rethink. One thing I find quite interesting is that Victorinox themselves have shown that this layer isn't untouchable. The Huntsman and Spartan light models replaced the magnifier with an LED torch or flashlight. I'm not suggesting that means Victorinox have gone off magnifiers, only that they've already demonstrated that this layer can evolve. If it were my decision, I'd leave this screwdriver exactly as it is. But instead of the magnifier, I'd love to see Victorinox use that space for a proper onboard multi-micro driver system. The Leatherman Wave Plus proves the idea works. It stores a single double-ended microdriver very neatly and anchors it really well for usage and decent torque. However, I would prefer to see proper 3-dimensional microdrivers like you have on this Roxxon M3 rather than Leatherman's flattened proprietary format. So imagine having 1 or 2 double-ended microdrivers anchored and stored in this layer. A micro Phillips, a micro flathead, a couple of Torx or micro hex sizes, whatever combination suited you. Personally, I'd much rather have those available every day than the magnifying glass. And because they would be stored here, you probably wouldn't even need the corkscrew microdrivers I showed earlier. And you could use that space for a SIM extractor or the Fire Ant Flint Striker solution or something else entirely, like those clever 3D printed pocket clips you see on Etsy. Now, I completely understand why Victorinox might never do that. Once you start adding interchangeable drivers, you're getting awfully close to Cybertool territory. But if they ever did decide to modernize the Explorer, that's the direction I'd love to see them going in. Turning a great screwdriver layer into an absolutely outstanding screwdriver layer. So what do I make of the Victorinox Explorer? I think it occupies one of the sweetest spots in Victorinox's entire 91mm range. It's compact enough to disappear into a pocket, yet still manages to include what I think is one of Victorinox's finest implements, that superbly versatile and beautifully crafted inline Phillips. As for the rest, the blades are exactly what you'd expect from Victorinox. The scissors are superb, and the opener layer is as useful as ever, especially once you add that economical little hex bit adapter hack. The hook, with a bit of light tape-based engineering, allows you to carry T-shank saws and files when and if you want to. That inline Phillips, though, is just epic. The only part I'm less convinced by today is the magnifying glass. Not because it's bad, it isn't. It's just that the world around it has changed. And most of us carry a far more capable magnifier in our pocket already, our phone. So, would I carry one? Absolutely I would. Would I change anything about it? Yes. To quote Columbo, just one more thing and you already know what that is. So now I'm curious, would you leave the magnifying glass exactly where it is? Or would you replace it with something more modern? Let me know down in the comments, and thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. All the best. Bye bye.